Hello and welcome to the Midnight Bible Study. I've heard people say, perhaps you have as well, that, oh, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I may have, there may have been a time in my life when I said something like that. I don't know. At one point, that's kind of how I lived for a period of my life. And ultimately, doing my own thing, in some ways, I sort of ran my ship across onto the rocks. The ship of my life. I sort of ran it on the rocks, facing depression and problems. And basically, I got to the point where I said, you know what, I've screwed this up enough. I'm going to just live by the Bible and trust God, and see what happens. And so that's what I did. And I have to tell you, it was a long and difficult road, but it got better and better. And I've been incredibly blessed ever since. Which is not to say that it's. I'm not talking in terms of like these these name it and claim it type prosperity preachers. I'm not saying it was an easy road. I'm just saying you can be entirely blessed in the middle of adversity. That's what I'm talking about. Anyway, so yes, spiritual or religious. I'm not religious. I'm just spiritual. It's very common, I think. But what the heck does that even mean? I think that means a lot of different things to different people. In fact, it probably means a little something different to virtually everybody, which is sort of like, a ship in the ocean with no sail and no anchor. It's just sort of adrift in a sea of danger with perils in every direction. But these people, why would they even say that if they don't really recognize Jesus and God? But they are spiritual, so they recognize that there is something. They aren't atheists, evidently. They're not materialists. They realize there is a spiritual element. They maybe don't really know what it is. They don't know much about it, perhaps. But we learn about this right in Romans in the Bible. It says, ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. So people, they sense God's presence in the spiritual. I mean, I don't know how you could not. But so it's right there in the Bible. Ever since creation, his eternal power and deity has been clearly perceived. People perceive it. In fact, St. Augustine said, "You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." Which I think that's a true statement that St. Augustine said. Certainly, in my case, I was restless and troubled for my whole life until I put my trust in Jesus Christ and in the Bible. The words of the Bible. So, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says, with man's openness to truth and beauty, he has a sense of moral goodness. So that's one of the ways we can sense that there's, we have this eternal soul and spirit. If it was just a free for all, some sort of a Darwinian, atheistic, Darwinian survival of the fittest world, then we wouldn't really have any use for this sense of moral goodness. It would just be survival of the fittest. But no, it says his moral goodness, his freedom of voice. He's free to, with man's openness to truth and beauty. His sense of moral goodness. That's going to be, that sense of moral goodness, obviously there's going to be, different levels and different people depending on how they perceive the spiritual, whatever that means to them. His freedom of voice and conscience. Why does man feel like they have a freedom of voice and conscience? His longings for the infinite. I remember when I was a little kid, I actually remember this. I couldn't have been more than maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I remember the first time it occurred to me that I was going to die. And it was a terrible thought to me. Like I was going to die. Like that was a shocking thing to me, because I think I had heard that, old people die. And I was like, what, you mean I could get old and die? It was the first time I realized that I had mortality. And it was a terrible thing. As a kid, it frightened me, and it seemed wrong. It seemed wrong that, like, it should end, and what's the point? And so yeah, with his longings for the infinite, for happiness, man questions himself about God's existence. Who doesn't do that? I don't know. I think everybody's probably done that, but maybe not. I know I have done it at times. I don't even question it anymore. For me, it's beyond settled fact. It's beyond obvious. I guess I'm trying to think if I ever doubted it. I'm not sure if I ever doubted it. I don't think I ever did. Except perhaps I doubted the Bible for a short time during college, thanks to my astronomy teacher, who knew absolutely nothing about Bible but made some bold claims against it, based on being a scientist of the probably the atheist sort, perhaps. I don't know. Anyway, he gave me some skepticism for a couple of years. Anyway, so this sense of good versus evil. We have this sense of good versus evil. Why? I mean, if it's just survival of the fittest, there shouldn't be good versus evil. It should just be survival versus death. But no, where does this come from? This survival of the fittest, this good versus evil. Well, it has to do with our eternal soul and our sense of moral that it seems to be inbuilt in our spirit from a good God, and we're His creation, and we're given a conscience. There would be no need for a conscience in a Darwinian world. So, but we have this sense of good versus evil, and God has sent. Well, with good versus evil, God has also sent His prophets to tell us to answer some of these questions, and to tell us the dangers that we're facing. Oh yeah, there's the spiritual. Oh yeah, I'm spiritual, but there's evil out there, and if you don't know what you're doing, you could fall right into it. Imagine there's two armies out there, the good versus the evil, the forces of light versus the forces of darkness, two armies. And then there's just some individual hippie or some whatever. Nothing against hippies, but I'm just saying someone who's out there living in their own world, their own reality, going, oh, I'm just spiritual. They're going to be crushed. They're going to be crushed because they're all out there. They don't know what's going on, and they're just ripe for picking. They're just going to be crushed by the evil because they're all by themselves. They don't have a clue. So these prophets come along and they tell us, look, you're sinners, and you're headed for hell if you don't shape up. God's going to destroy. He's going to let the evil forces destroy Israel, and take the people of Israel captive because you have offended Him and not listened to Him. So God sends His prophets to warn of danger. And we have the opportunity to listen to that and wise up and shape up. And we have a choice between, we find out from these prophets that we can go to heaven or hell. And we have a choice. We can decide one way or the other. Somebody would have a choice to go to heaven and they would choose not to? Is that completely insane? So, here in just in the material world here, we have a similar sort of parallel situation. Like, there's the criminal world and there's the civilized world, the law-abiding world, the organized world, with laws and expectations. And someone can go, oh, I'm a free spirit. I'm not interested in organized laws. And so they could go out and kill somebody or do all kinds of horrible things. And then they get that they have that freedom. But of course that there's consequences to all actions, whether that's true right now here in our present as well as in the future spiritual world. In fact, those consequences of our present actions go on and on for eternity. And so that's why we need to be saved. We need to be saved by Jesus Christ through his mercy, through his grace, through his forgiveness. But we have to humble ourselves and get beyond this thing that, oh, I just do things my own way. Well, okay. That's essentially what Satan said when he was kicked out of heaven. And he said, no, I will not serve. Non servio. I will not serve. And a third of the angels agreed with him, and they're the fallen angels, commonly referred to as demons. And they were kicked out of heaven and thrown down to earth. It's the same spirit that affects many people. Oh, I'll just do my own thing. I'm not going to follow I'm not going to listen to God or do what God says. No, I'll just do my own thing. Okay, you're wide open. You have absolutely no protection. You're wide open, and there's an army of darkness. And you're just like that straggling wildebeest out on the plains of Africa. That's the one they go for, the one who's got no protection, who's floundering around and has no one to protect it, thinks it is doing its own thing, or it's just wounded. It may just be wounded, but it can't keep up with the rest, and so it's vulnerable. And that strikes me as being the situation of the spiritual person who is just doing their own thing. They're all by themselves. They don't have the protection, the protections of being obedient to God and the system that has been set up, the one church that God established for his sheep to be part of the flock. God bless you, and good night from the Midnight Bible Study.